I'm Chris Turner, I'm Chief Exec of British Bids. Welcome to you all. And we have got two interesting speakers today. We're running a whole bundle of these workshops and seminars, so it's good to have people here. And this whole issue of hybrid working, flexible working, the changes to working space, the way that buildings are being repurposed in a variety of different fashions is just going round and round the bid community at the moment. Great stories from some about Debenhams buildings being turned into bits of university campuses, being turned into shared boutique spaces. So there's some great stories out there about repurposing and flexible working, and lots of stories from colleagues across the bid community about hot desking companies being set up to respond to the whole working from home agenda. So it seemed to us very useful to gather a group together this afternoon just to talk this through. And as luck would have it, we had by then already met Zoe and Rupert. Zoe, as you probably know, runs a company called Spaces to Places, which is particularly looking at some of these agendas and has been very involved in a very beautiful building near me in Basingstoke. So she's been working very hard on that. And Rupert has got an amazing company called x+why, which is looking at very innovative and creative solutions for things. And for those who keep an eye on Sky News, Rupert was on a few days ago talking about this very matter. So this is pertinent. We're going to run it quite quickly by getting Zoe to kick off. She'll take us through some PowerPoint, introduce herself. We'll pick out questions and answers. I think probably better, if you're happy, we run from Zoe straight into Rupert, collect all the Q&As and the chat, and then put some questions to people at the end of the whole process, because there's a flow between these two presentations and we don't want to lose that sense of flow. So welcome, mute. We are recording, and Zoe will now share her screen and take us through. Welcome, Zoe.
Thank you very much. So I think, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me today. I'm super passionate to be here, having been the first marketeer of the first business improvement district, Kingston upon Thames in the UK, back in sort of 2005 time, when the first bid first couple of bids came to the UK. So hence I'm very familiar with bids. What's key now, and I see, is really evolving and preparing for the new consumer reality. The human race has always evolved, and I'm going to take you through the impact of the flexible working model on our places today. So I'm going to sort of do some scene setting first, and I think if you think back, you used to move out an office out of necessity, not choice. It was costly, it was complicated, it was time consuming. It was a nightmare, to be quite honest. Think back to those cubicle desk times with faxes, paperwork, hardwires, computers and phones. And now the opposite extreme I'm noticing. Already I'm seeing like the Gen Z generation are comfortable just working from a tablet. And there's an operator in Hive that's just in Winchester growing with about 9 locations at the moment. They're actually microchipping some of their customers to access their office. So technology has been the biggest, I would say, enabler of flexible working. And so we now need to think about, businesses are free to change workspaces quite quickly with minimal expense and much less effort. We've become familiar with that term, hot desking, but we now need to become familiar with the term hot offices. For me, the fallout with COVID has in many ways been a catalyst for the role of the office in flexible working. Now, employees, consumers, they want to spend their time and split it between working from home and the office, meaning that office-based time is much more focused on collaboration, networking with colleagues, meeting with clients, and that collaboration. So the way we have interacted with the office has changed with, the biggest home working experiment ever. And I see some really interesting models now appearing. And I would say what's been interesting is the rise of really, I would say the express model, these convenient locations where there's great touchdown spaces. We've seen this rise of the really 15-minute city concept. And what I'm thinking about here is like got the village hotels, and they have B-Works in their hotels, which is a touchdown space that you can join as members. It's the next level up from, say, a Starbucks or a Pret. You can leave your laptop quite safely there, but it's much more a touchdown space. And so these are really increasing in demand, especially in town centres as well. On the opposite extreme, I'm seeing the reimagination of now office spaces in the core city centres and sort of that, I'm calling it a hub model. And you know, think of 22 Bishopsgate, where there's restaurants, there's hotels nearby. It's a full day experience, because this is more for wonder and wow factor. People are going to travel longer to some of these workplaces, and they're going to meet with colleagues and clients, and they're going to have lunch, they're going out in the evening. And so it's a totally different purpose of an office there. So from the opposite spectrum of that convenience. The one that I'm delighted that I'm sort of Rupert here from x+why, because I think x+why is really about a club model, how I see it. And this is about bringing together like-minded businesses and workplaces. And they're about sort of clustering, whether it's tech, eco, purpose-driven businesses. But these are more people traveling sort of for secondary catchment areas, 45 minutes drives, to be around like-minded people. So what I'm seeing is some really new, exciting developments within the office model in some ways. And you can see here how I've sort of taken it from sort of the Tesco model of an express or anything there, and the different types of formats. So we're seeing different size of offices as well, and different purposes of office evolving at the moment. But the subject we're really here to talk about is really what's happening with bids and workspaces. And in the pandemic, two emerging trends converged for myself. The decline in relevancy of bricks and mortar retail has met with the increased demand for near-to-home working. This has resulted in a revolution in the way we work. This is really what I'm talking about, is the officisation of the high street. Helping this become much more near a reality has been the greatest reform for the planning system in September and since really World War II. So it's made change of use much, much easier. And local governments are being very supportive of some of the changes. I think what's key now is, I take you through some examples. We probably know the big names at the moment, the Westfield, Selfridges, John Lewis, M&S have all said that they're turning office retail space into office space. So, and I'm seeing more mixed use developments. But I think what's quite key, is being myself a specialist in the flexible office market sector now with Places, is to give you a sense of an overview of the market. The flexible office sector I would determine as office space that people are taking from sort of even just hiring from an hour to up to 3 years. So this is what makes it flexible. But this is only 5% of the whole office market, pre-COVID statistics. 95% is a conventional lease that most businesses would sign up for. So that's been sort of the 95% of the market. Now we're looking at this flexible sector and seeing the really growth of people wanting workspaces on demand. And I can now see, and the different predictions are that it's going up from 5% to 30%. So you can see this market is rapidly increasing, and lots of different industry reports. What's fascinating for me, everybody thinks the market is Regis, which is under IWG there, or WeWork. And actually, when you look at it, you know, IWG's got 6% of that market share of flexible office market. WeWork's got 1%. The majority of the market, 88%, is small independents. And we've got over 6,000 of these small independents making up 88% of the market. So there's huge local vibrancy within the market and the sector at the moment. So it's really exciting and seeing it evolving as well. Examples, these are the ones I've put up some examples to go through with, sort of thinking about Basingstoke, Inkhide, they're within a bid area. They actually had some funding from the council to set up a workspace area. Another fascinating example is in Taunton in Della's Wharf, and the company spaces are in there as workspaces. And so that was a former nightclub space. Godalming, we've got Club 66 there, and they're looking to build a bid as well. So there's some of these sort of high street examples that I can think of. But what I'm noticing now is also on the fringe areas, we're seeing that I would say are non-sort of prime core retail space being used into sort of flexible workspaces. So in Reading, Just above the Broad Street Mall is Co-Space, and that opened in September. And then Kingston upon Thames, the boutique workspace have just opened along London Road as well. So just on the, you know, the thing I'm sort of trying to highlight here is seeing workspaces open on the fringes because of the larger size footprints and space they want, because some office, you know, shops cannot be turned into offices for different reasons. But people are wanting the sort of 15-minute city sort of, lifestyle now and live work location. So Clockwise is another one that's quite interesting there in Exeter. They're just very near Princess Hay, so all on the perimeters there. So increase in these providers, and they've all opened very recently as well with the fringe areas. But the other one we've sort of mentioned before is now mixed use is a huge thing of blending workspaces with other uses, and so seeing so many more planning permissions come through at the moment. I think a good example, back to Kingston, and because very fond of Kingston with bid there. 9 Yards Living is an interesting one, because this is a picture here as well. On the top floors are co-living, and then the bottom sort of area is a co-working space. And so it's blending the two there in a real prime sort of town centre area. Other developments have just been incorporating workspaces like Soapworks in Bristol. Interesting one to watch is that group as well, that they're doing lots of multi-use developments. They've got quite a few, the Nice and Lease site with Southsea, M&S and Bournemouth as well. And they're using perhaps sort of the workspaces, co-working into their whole proposition with mixed use. So there's some really exciting different developments happening now, bringing workspaces much more into our bid areas. And I'm delighted to have questions later, but I know Rupert's going to speak next. But I thought hopefully that gives you a nice flavour of a few different things happening in the industry and sector.
Zoe, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. And as someone who actually has turned his bid office into a series of hot desking spaces, and we work with IncuHive, you're absolutely right. There's so much going on at the moment. It really is very exciting. Let's move on to Rupert for a slightly more focused view of it, and then we'll have some Q&As and some shared questions afterwards. Rupert, thank you very much indeed.
So thanks everybody. Thanks for having me, Chris and the team. It's much appreciated. So I'm going to talk from an in the field perspective, from an X and Y perspective. I'm just going to talk a little bit about who we are and what we've been doing, and the strategy around the changing kind of work practices that you're seeing and that Zoe just spoke about. So X and Y itself, I think Zoe sort of touched on it, but what we are trying to do is we've actually sort of got a mission to, which is our big hairy goal, which is to change the way the world works for good by ultimately creating really kind of innovative workspaces that are green and industry leading, and ideally filling it with really interesting businesses who understand the connection between doing good and doing well, i.e. that they look at things like people and planet as well as profit, and what some might call the triple bottom line. And those companies are the ones that are obviously attracting the very best employees, suppliers and customers, and therefore creating more profit. So ideally what we wanted to do was create these really inspiring spaces, fill them with like-minded people, and get them to work with people who were probably on a slightly earlier journey in terms of their ESG, their environmental, social and governance values, and try and bring them up the chain, and try and create an environment where we can allow people to come to our space to actually learn why it's important and how they can do it. So we talk about shifting mindsets and then tracking that in businesses who are members and changing business behaviors. Another big thing you ought to know about us is that we don't take leases, we work with landlords. So what we try and do is we work with landlords who want to have a purpose behind their space, that they like the idea of sustainability, of supply chain, of innovative workspace, of collaboration, and we help them along the way from feasibility and design through to HR, operations, technology, which we'll touch on, and brand and sales ultimately. So we've got sites predominantly in London at the moment. So in East London, in Aldgate East, in Spitalfields, in Holborn, in Chiswick, and then we're moving out of London and sort of tracking through major gateway cities and towns throughout the UK. And we are basically running a sort of strategy of what we refer to as hub and roam, and what you might hear about as being hub and spoke. But a lot of what we do is also work within the retail sector. So for example, Cambridge, which you see there, which I'll talk about in a second specifically as a case, is actually in a shopping centre in Cambridge and is a disused, redeveloped mother-care unit of 20,000 square feet. So I'll touch on that in a bit. But just quickly in terms of what we're actually seeing that's changed over this period. And to be honest, like a lot of this was already happening, but just for a much smaller number of progressive businesses that were already seeing the idea of having a workspace 24/7, 365 days of the year for 100% of their staff was absolutely daft. And why would you pay for all of that space when you could encourage a bit more hybrid working, have a more flexible workforce, and only pay for the space that you take as you need? But actually, it was such a smaller number of a small percentage of overall businesses. And that has obviously massively changed since March 2020. And what you're now going to see is pretty much the majority, if not all, companies experiencing some sort of hybrid working. It's not easy, is the first thing I'd say. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's very hard to maintain culture, well-being, productivity, whilst allowing people the trust and autonomy to work where they want, when they want. So you'll see sort of various different versions of this, from the Goldman Sachs, you'll never leave the office, to kind of a remote-only policy. But I think hybrid working is here to stay. And I think ultimately, we don't need to go to an office to sit at a desk to work 9 till 5. I think we've worked out that we can all do that from home. But I think there are just another sort of several reasons for the office. The purpose of it is really as a destination for the very manifestation of what you are as a brand. So your culture, your mentorship, hospitality, collaboration, engagement, and those things cannot be dealt with through a virtual world alone. I, for one, would love, for example, to be having this in person, because it is mildly exhausting talking into a screen quite a lot of the time. But that's where we are. So, just a quick thing on what is changing. So the role of the office has changed. We know that the changing use of the office, financial considerations are changing. So people are really thinking about their P&Ls. In terms of, typically the office space might be as much as 20% of the total cost on a P&L, which is kind of ridiculous. And what the requirements are, which is really, people are looking much more towards the office as a destination for well-being, mentorship, culture, hospitality, fun, but also health and safety and engagement. And what you're seeing is a lot of people now having to work out a policy of how they're going to deal with, encourage, but help support remote working and their employees who want to engage in remote working or work near home. So that's why we always talk about how businesses will always have a hub in major gateway cities that they go to as destinations, of which they will take potentially less space, but not as much as you probably think, maybe up to 20% less. But they will also engage their employees in encouraging them to leave home when they want to engage with a work near home co-working space or otherwise. And it's that I want to touch on, because everyone else talks about the hubs, but it's really about what people need when they're working from home, which is probably not to be working at home 24/7, but actually what you need is a place to go that's really easy to get to, really easy to book, really easy to access. Why? Because you've got to think about people's mental health, their physical health, their productivity, their connectivity and security of connections, and many, many other issues that we have. And so really what we're talking about is a multiple sort of pop-up transit, like in QHive, like you saw there, which people can access mostly through technology and be able to tap into and then pay for additional amenities as you need it. Those will principally be where people go for collaboration, to escape home, for focused working, for Zoom calls, and to build a sense of community with your local area. So these are kind of transforming high streets in some senses. And I just wanted to quickly talk about one that we're currently doing. We're in the Grafton Centre, like I was mentioning, in Cambridge, which is it is a shopping centre, ex-mother care. And by the way, there are lots of these, right? So whether it's a Debenhams, as Chris said at the beginning, whether it's a Next, whether it's a Topshop, whatever it happens to be, there's an awful lot of this sort of stuff happening. Now, the reason I really like these is because why wouldn't you like it when you can go to one place where you can promote engagement with retail, with F&B, with leisure, with gyms, and you've got it all under one roof. And you can allow people to do what we sometimes refer to as asynchronized working, which is this idea that actually you don't need to sit at a desk from 9 to 5:30 and then switch off. You can do your work whenever you want. You can go to the gym whenever you want. You can go to the cinema. You can work out. You can go have a drink whenever you want, as long as you're kind of doing the work that you want and you've got a place to go when you need it. And that's why I really, really quite like these ideas of transforming retail. I also think we have a duty to redevelop. We don't have a duty to create more, because that's incredibly bad for the planet. I think there's some statistic about 60% of the spaces that we work in 10 years' time exist today. So we have an obligation to sort of repurpose and rework what we have. And that sustainability angle is massively in demand, both from employees, but also increasingly from companies. And that's something that we've got to do, and that's relatively simple to do in a very basic sense. It can get very complicated, but as long as you're dealing with, your quality, your utilities, your supply chain, your quality of air, your sunlight, etc., where you're procuring your furniture from, etc., then you can still create a phenomenal product, but run something at a relative mitigation to your carbon footprint that so many sort of commercial buildings struggle with today. The other thing about these footprints for these retail spaces are that they are traditionally in great locations. So they are arguably in better locations from a transport perspective than even the very best commercial buildings in some of these towns. And I think that's a really interesting one. And as long as you can make a day pass cheaper than a ticket to London, then frankly, it's going to be, you worry less probably about the impact, the demand from individuals to actually pay for those spaces. And I think also what you might see is a lot of people being given money by their company in order to be able to access co-working spaces for their own well-being. I hope they do. I hope that's where they use their savings from the space and that they direct it towards people's well-being in that sense. That they are very tricky, but the last point on this slide is they are very, very difficult to convert. 80% of things that come across our desk, we immediately have to say no to. Sometimes it's size, but the majority of time it's light, and that's probably a fairly obvious thing to say. But these things tend to be, black boxes, because the light installations for retail are very, very different to obviously the natural light requirements that you have from a working perspective. But a quick word on tech. So this is a terrible looking slide. I apologize, but this is the role of technology has evolved significantly in this area over the last 3 to 4 years. Everything can now be done remotely, right? Traditionally through an app that can allow you in a very sort of similar way to your traditional Ubers or your Airbnbs to be able to hunt down, locate, book, access, and pay for space as you need it. Because that's going to be the fundamental thing. The difference between these roam products is you are principally targeting people who are on the move. They might wake up and not know whether they're going to London that day, or to Bristol, or to Manchester, or to Liverpool that day. They might decide at the last minute to book in, but they don't want to pay monthly. So you've got to be able to have that ability to be able to charge at multiple points, whether it's daily, whether it's 10 days a month, 20 days a month, or full time. and they are much more members club focused. They are much more memberships tend to be sort of less kind of larger companies, much more SMEs and entrepreneurs that access these spaces. And then that technology can also, I think Zoe alluded to earlier, you can also allow your employees within your own office to book a desk in the office so that you can control space in your own office. So that allows you to take less space, but doesn't allow you the issue of having too many people turn up at once. So all sorts of jazzy technology that I could spend a lot of time going into, but I won't. But anyway, I hope that's kind of a helpful oversight of our sort of approach to strategy with a hub and roam approach across core gateway cities and towns, and targeting those high residential commuter belts for that more roam product with greater transience.
That's absolutely great, Rupert. Thank you so much. Rupert, you were mentioning that debate that businesses are going to have about whether they put their money directly into some of these roaming hubs, or do they give the money to the employee, or the employee effectively picks up the difference because he or she isn't commuting into work. How do you think that's going to pan out? It is going to make quite a difference, that, isn't it?
Yeah, it will make a big difference. There's so many of these kind of roaming co-working applications that exist today that allow you to be able to find, access and book multiple sites across it. I haven't come across anything that's phenomenal that allows employers to subsidize through a wallet-based system.
Right.
It tends to be directly from their own wallet, and I guess they're subsidized directly in their pay. I personally am not necessarily a huge fan of that. I would much rather, in the same way that people don't subsidize well-being by just giving people a gym membership, that they actually provide it in a way that people can access it only in certain areas, whether that is actually a gym rather than beer, and whether that, or a mental health app, or going to a co-working space, or whatever it is. But that technology is really difficult because what it means is that you have to integrate with the actual operator's technology system, and they're all different. They're all just very different, and so the actual integrations are much more difficult, so it's very manual.
The thing that I would say is, going back to that market where you've got so many independents, that's one of the biggest issues. Hence why Salesforce, Cisco, and quite a few large corporations have gone straight for the easy option and taken a Regis pass, system for all their employees. But the only one that I've seen that's sort of there's quite a few technology companies trying to solve this issue, because I think everybody's on it. There's one called Asana that Nike has signed up for, and different ones that then actually manage a co-working budget for employees. But it's very much at the infancy, I think, with all of these at the moment, that solution there. But unfortunately, quite a few companies have now recently coming out with their sort of flexible working policies and putting some policies around it. Some companies better than others, offering some budget or expensing sort of a membership to different locations. But it's one that's a huge debate at the moment, and companies and HR departments working out what's the best solution.
Okay, that's very useful. I got a question from Ian, who actually is the BID chief exec in Cambridge, so clearly quite interested in what's happening there, who puts the point that, is planning going to be an issue here? In other words, that change of use, is that going to be a constraint, or will the new local authority rules that Generic announced a month or so ago, will that remove that as a problem?
I'm going to be very careful what I say. There is a obviously, under the new Class C system, there is generally change of use. However, a lot of what you're actually going to get requirement for consent on is light, so is to change exteriors and facades. But generally, I hope that is a benefit to the overall product, the overall building, and the overall sense of existence of that building and user experience. So I hope that it's not too difficult to get, and I also hope that the benefits to overall retail and other sectors that are in that area as a result of a co-working space being there will actually only improve that experience again, and that actually the benefits of that in a struggling retail sector, for example, will actually be encouraged and not discouraged.
That's really interesting. I mean, one factor I picked up in the paper, I think yesterday, Economist, I think that I think Richmond-on-Thames had 75% of its workforce working from home, and Burnley had, I think, 17% working from home. Do you think those regional disparities are going to be a big issue here, or do you think it will even out over time?
It's statistics that I've looked at, it's some ping data that's really fascinating. And there's a simple equation, which is the nearer somebody is to their office, the more likely they have returned.
Yes.
So it is a distance thing, and we're sort of doing the mapping there, that's the correlation in simple terms that I've seen with all the statistics.
What do you think bids can do in this agenda?
I think with all of the changes of use, there's quite a lot of changes of use happening. I think we're just we're mainly focusing on workspaces, and it's working through those, seeing much more, I would say, like sort of the hotel lobbying coming in, and new experience products there as well, and competitive like socializing, much more different type of eateries coming into the town centres. And I think it is now thinking what's experience, how to elevate and reactivate these places. And so I think it is just thinking creatively with all different spaces and utilisation there and opportunities. It is still working in partnership. I think the biggest change for me now is it isn't about separate buildings. It is trying to blend them all together. And actually, you can have more than one flexible office operator. They are totally, I'm trying to think of this, there's a huge spectrum of different providers. So you could have a really sort of small independent, you could have one just focusing on the tech sector. And so it's bringing the diversity, I think, of different operators in is going to really help. And trying to look for supportive partnerships. I think, like Rupert's there looking for the right landlords to work with. I think that's where it's trying to bring in variety of different tenants. I'm finding quite a few of the local sort of independent co-working operators are looking to expand. And so trying to tap into them, I think that would be an obvious one to see if there's opportunities, if different buildings and stuff. So the opportunity now is really thinking creatively and to sort of activated places. That's from my perspective, and not thinking in traditional terms and trying to think left field. And I know council has put some budgets, especially the local plans. Where I've seen it most interesting is local plans about economic development as well, and the social impacts. So that's where I've seen quite a few different deals being done, resonating on those key trends. So because most people do want to bring economy back to town centres.
Absolutely right. I mean, one of the agendas for bids, I think, is that we will need to, to celebrate this flexible office, hot desking stuff in the middle of our towns, rather than having them set out in the edges of our towns, which will take people away. And I think that's going to be an interesting point about us identifying possible spaces, and then coming to people like you two to say, here is space, and then working in partnerships, presumably with local authorities and with the owners. Who are the key players? I mean, Rupert, the Cambridge one is interesting, and Ian's on the call and may want to unmute and come in here. Who are the key players, Rupert, in the Cambridge one?
Yeah, so I mean, from our perspective, we work with the landlord, who is a very large institutional landlord around the UK and beyond. So we predominantly deal with them and their agent, and obviously local council, to be able to promote the scheme. I think part of what we kind of want to have is more engagement with council, to be honest, to be able to give the version of it and give the image of it and give the vision for it, because we genuinely believe we don't do this thing for bottom line alone. We wouldn't be doing this if we didn't think that it would work, and the only way it's going to work is if you create a sustainable a place to go that actually supports the local socio-economic kind of factors in that area, but also encourages well-being for people, I suppose. And I guess it's just a case, frankly, of what is the impact of a change of use? And if it's as simple as, well, we haven't considered the rest of the scheme and the impact in that, then I would understand it, right? But the reality is, I don't think we'd ever take on a scheme which we didn't think would work to benefit the local community, because actually that's the only way it is going to work.
Yeah.
That's as a result of the fact that it's actually part of a wider scheme. It's part of a wider space making scheme, which is what Zoe was alluding to. So whether that is retail, F&B, competitive socializing, well-being, gym, whatever it happens to be, these things can be really, really well kind of corroborated to create, amazingly powerful spaces for people to be able to go and improve local areas. So, I'd actually, like more access, frankly, but,
Ian from Cambridge Bid is here. Ian, give us your thoughts on this one, because clearly exciting project for you, I'd have thought.
Yeah, I think it's very exciting. Rupert, we can chat offline. I think I met with John, who you know well, the centre recently, and I won't share some of the issues that I know you've got, which he was asking. But I think the issue for locations is, Rupert, I'm sure you've got plenty of opportunities around the country to look at, and if we as a location, if we as a bid or a local authority can't make it easier for you to get that change of use probably and make it quick, then you might take your money somewhere else. And I think us as locations need to think that we need to be welcoming these changes and welcoming this investment, I think. And otherwise you hear some locations that they're not as welcoming, and therefore so I think bids can play a role, Chris, to answer your question, in trying to give a slightly more of a helicopter view of a location, because councils try their best to be in tune with the economic temperature of their location, but often they're not. To be fair, and therefore the councils often look to bids, as we've seen during the pandemic, look to bids as to tell them what's happening in their business community, what are the needs of their business community, and therefore when opportunities come along to have change of uses on this scale, then the bid can play a part and say, yeah, we feel it is right, or it isn't, as the case may be. And I think we have got a role to play, definitely.
That's just so useful, isn't it? And Charlotte, you got an interesting point about landlords who we know want to do this, but haven't got the capital. How do we as bids help landlords access people like Zoe and Rupert? How do we help you know about rock and roll sites that could be terrific?
Is that for me, Chris?
Either really. Yeah, start with you, Rupert, and then come to you, Zoe. Is there a database of people who are possible, intermediaries in this, or do we all come to you and Zoe? How do we work it like that?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Quite a lot of it is. Certainly with most of the stuff that we've seen, it is. They are quite often privately owned spaces with people with reasonably significant balance sheets, it's fair to say, that will probably certainly have a bigger balance sheet than X and Y, that's for sure, and a better place to do that. I do obviously think that where it is improving local districts, that actually maybe there could be a more sort of public-private partnership in terms of development of that site. Certainly, if there was a reflection of perhaps even what people sometimes refer to as Section 106 or local kind of environmental improvement or social improvement for people to be able to access that space either on a discount or to sort of assist with kind of local programs and charity, etc. So, maybe there is more of a sort of public-private partnership element that could happen here if it's shown to prove that we can support local environment.
And Zoe, your recollections of your projects, have they been private, public, or people have come directly to you? How has that worked?
It has mainly been more the private. I think lots of it has been lots of public interest and business planning at the moment. Often I find it's sometimes the wrong locations, I think, or too small locations that won't work, and so hence they can't find the right provider. So I think there's a lot of education into what the sector need, flexible workspace of what is needed to make it a viable proposition. I think that's quite a key one. There's quite an educational process. Where it's working really well, I would say, is locating Kent, and actually they're a spin-off from the council in Kent, and actually for the economic benefits of the whole area. they've got just a task force group working with flexible office providers to help them find the right sites. So they're much more a proactive council, you know, of matching up and actually having a list. There isn't really a generic list, you know, of all the sort of providers or anything like that. That's the hard thing. But locating Kent has been the nearest one that I've seen to be really proactive, sort of saying, we see this as a huge growth sector. We want to be making sure we're matching the private and the public sector together. As I think, and likewise, it seems to be more as a generic council, so like Devon as well, quite similar. They manage and work with sort of 11 of the smaller workspaces of there as Devon work hubs and stuff. So I think most of the councils are more looking at it at a sort of regional level as opposed to the town centre level. It's always the way, finding the right person with different things to make these opportunities happen.
I mean, that's interesting because bids, of course, generally know about their town centres. I mean, there are some industrial bids, but broadly, bids are market towns and city centres that we know about places. And generally, we know about vacant properties early. So those two things means bids could be great players in this. And Ian's made the point again that it could be one way of bringing some of these out of town business parks into the middle of town again, having had 20 years of everyone flowing out. Let's get people coming back in again. So there's a whole agenda of interest. Charlotte, you had a couple of questions which you've put in the chat. Do you want to unmute and put them because they're quite interesting?
Just had a chat. I am a bit along High Street, which is there are quite a lot of, well, a little bit of vacancy, but they're not huge spaces. So I was chatting to a workspace provider today about it, and I said, have you considered taking on 2 or 3 little places along the High Street rather than just one big one, because then you've got the economy of scale. And they said they hadn't considered it, but they thought about it for a few minutes. And so there's obviously lots of, it's all changing at the moment, but I've got a pub that is huge that wants to do workspace, but they haven't got the money because they haven't been making any money. So they need, and it's just how we link the right people up with the right landlords. At the moment, I mean, that's why my original question about having a database of different providers and what they do and what they want and what they're looking at.
Yeah, I think that's Charlotte. I think that's right. I think I certainly don't think it needs to be contiguous space. I think it can be multiple spaces. I mean, obviously, you kind of the closer the better, but they don't have to be joined. I mean, I think that's quite fun. I think you can have a lot of fun with that. We had something similar in Cambridge as well. We had 2 units, and we just created 2 completely separate zones and products. So that's quite fun. There is an economy of scale element depending on what the returns are ultimately that people want. Big landlord. The natural comparison is to what I could get if it was a shop or a pub or whatever. And quite often there is a kind of, due to the infrastructure cost and the cost of sale, I suppose, or the property cost, there is a kind of minimum price, particularly because with transients, what you really need is, you need to sell a lot, right? So it's a bit like the gym membership. You need to sell a seat more than once, probably, 1.5 times, let's say, and hope that everyone comes together and technology can do that. So it can be tight in terms of the numbers, depending on what the expectations are. But I think you can have a lot of, I mean, I would say this, but I think, because there should be fun involved in it, but you should be able to do a lot of sort of really interesting things with non-contiguous spaces that can support the high street.
I mean, I'm quite interested in bids roles because at Winchester we got an old church hall that our office is in. It was a bit surplus requirement, and we've got 35 hot desks just using our space now. Real bottom end stuff, costs are absolutely minimal, just about covers our rents, but allows 35 businesses. They're all working from home. A great quote from one of them that he gave me was he wants someone to come where he can talk to clients and they can't hear his children and his dog. So he doesn't want to come all the time. He just wants to pop in, a couple of phone calls, bit of FaceTime, bit of Zoom, and then back home again. And I think bids can have that role if we can just look at the sort of our own office spaces and how we use those.
An interesting one in Winchester as well, Maven, the bridal shop, that they've actually totally pivoted from a bridal shop into a women's sort of only co-working area. So there's
it's
lots
great.
of
Absolutely right, and it's just those sort of stuff has been just superb in the lockdown. People that used to go to London now aren't. They're coming together. They're using spaces in a very, very innovative fashion. There's just some good, fun things happening. I don't know if Paul Clement's still on the call, but you've got this big project in your town centre, this 15-minute thing. I'm just wondering if there's anything there, Paul, you can chip in with.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Can't see me. Well,
No, I can see you now. Yeah, you're there. You're there.
I think it was better when you couldn't, Chris.
No. It's great to see you again. A bit murky, but lovely to see you. Because you've got this 15-minute project running in your place. I mean, how are you using this hot desking, flexible working model that's emerging?
So it's a connected town principle, and you're right, it's based on 15 minutes. So the theory is that with more people living locally, if we can achieve that, then we need to provide around them the things they will need to live their lives locally. And part of that, as you say, Chris, is workspace. So, you know, we've got very conventional workspace in Ipswich. We've got one flexible office space, but we're going to try and do it in a really, really flexible way, probably working with university and the college. So we know that's something that's needed. So, you know, the theory is that if you were going to work from home 2 days a week, home may not be the place, as you said, Chris, that is suitable for you to work from. You still might need a desk to go to, even though you're not going to your main office twice a week. So that kind of added flexibility.
And I think we're going to see more. I'm just going to put a lot of pressure on broadband, a lot of pressure on the support mechanisms. But what it's going to give, of course, to our town centres is a real influx of people who used to go away to work and now are staying in the town to work. And of course, the big challenge here is talking to bids in the centre of London, is what that's going to mean in Canary Wharf and in Colmore Row in Birmingham, where there's a huge insurance banking industry where they're already being told work from home. And the challenge there is going to be what we put in those big city centres, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, you know, the work from home thing just doesn't work for everybody. Home is not necessarily the place. You can do your work. So what you need is a local desk or a local space to do it, even that's what your employer is asking you to do.
And a great question which came up earlier on, I think from Susie, which ties in with this really, which is why we do want to go to the office occasionally, which is this issue of confidentiality. You don't want to be in open space offices and talking about private things. You've got to have somewhere private to go to. I mean, is that the point you're making, Susie? If you want to chip in now.
Yes, that is. Basically, I know that a lot of businesses are very worried about their conversations with their clients, and being in an open desk space, it's very difficult with background noise. And I know a lot of the workplaces that are provided, they have minimum amount of offices that you can actually enter into to have a conference. So it could be that you've booked a space and you're stuck at that desk and then you want to take a really important call that you don't want people to overhear. And I just wondered what the thoughts were on that and how we overcome that for businesses.
Rupert, thoughts on that?
So, I mean, fundamental that you have places to escape to, Susie, to be honest. So, for us, we refer to things like Zoom booths or work booths or, you know, frankly, even a meeting room, right, that you can either access for free or subsidized or whatever it is that you can easily book and use or just use if available. That you've got to be able to go and access those acoustics and soundproofing is always the bugbear on a lot of sort of slightly average co-working spaces. And actually, it's the one thing that you don't want to get wrong, along with decent Wi-Fi and coffee.
Yeah, coffee being a key driver, I think.
Yeah, key driver, right? So, so I think, yeah, I mean, look, that's fundamental, Susie. I also think actually security of connection. A lot of people deal with a very, very highly valuable information that could be targeted quite easily at home systems. And I think a lot of companies are very wary of that as well. So, you know, co-working spaces, they tend to be very, very secure kind of firewall lines. So, yeah, that's a must-have. Is those Zoom booths, but we've now kind of changed slightly so that you can now get the perfect lighting as well, Susie, so that you get, you've got a very good background map there, which you can see very, very clearly. Like sometimes these people, they have these lights that they put by their screen to make sure that there's no shadow. And so with some of our booths, we've done that on the outline. Not sure it's working for me, but it's still pretty good.
Those of us who've got young kids and grandkids know all about this, because if they're on TikTok, they've got the lighting rig to go with their phones. If you look at cool youngsters on TikTok, they've all got amazing lighting rigs, which is one thing we have discovered, because we're doing a bit of work on this, is the market, as ever, in that wonderful capitalist fashion, is responding to this. And there's a company in Sweden that's now producing little booth pods almost of completely soundproof space, which you can literally parachute into any office, have 3 of them in a row, just one of them, and that they are completely soundproof electronic pods, and you just plug them in and they go. Very cool. There's one in a business just down from Waterloo. If you want to go and see it, I'll try and find the name. They're not cheap, but they do allow you to instantly turn an ordinary bit of space into a little group of sort of decent looking pods.
I remember they had those at service stations, the Regis capsules, right, Zoe? Do you remember that? And
yes, yeah.
I never saw anyone in it, but
really, that's just disproves my point then. So clearly everyone looks at the things. Wow, they look cool, but I ain't going to go into one of those.
Well, I don't know why you'd fill your car up, go to a petrol station, go into.
That's true.
I'd go and sit down and do some work, but.
Yes.
But meeting rooms is the huge one, and now team space, that's the huge demand. And like Rupert was saying, with apps and everything, it's on demand. Literally, people are saying we need a team meeting, we need to find the right office location to bring our team together, and literally they're doing it that evening, and it's tomorrow if they want to find that space. Yeah. So finding it's much more quicker, and trying to find people meeting space is the one that's been quite a key driver throughout the pandemic, that people still had to do important meetings and finding a way to do those meetings and face to face.
We got to respond to this. I do some work in France, and across France now there's a network of these startup spaces in really quite small villages. They're just taking over spaces, government funding to refurb them, and you can actually do your work across lots of France. The Chamber of Commerce supported projects, and the government's just putting money into this. So we've got to catch up with this, because if we don't, we're gonna slip away. Now, colleagues, I think we're probably coming to an end. I'm just looking down the list. I think we've picked up all the questions, and anyone who wants to say anything now, probably now is the time to say it. No, I think probably folks are happy. Yeah, Rupert and Zoe, thank you so much for that. It really has been good. I suspect you'll find that those of us who can't find developers and entrepreneurs and money will now be coming to one of you two to try and solve our problems. So be prepared for that. Clearly, this has excited a lot of interest. We had 82 signed up and about 40 have actually turned up. So that's, again, of interest. Can I thank you very much indeed? A round of sort of metaphorical virtual applause to both of you. Thank you very much indeed for that. And colleagues, good luck, good seeing you. And let's, as ever, keep in touch. Thanks very much indeed. Zoe and Rupert, that was just lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Look after yourselves. Bye-bye to you.
Take care. Bye.